Alright guys, hello and welcome to the WISP video covering Python basics. Alright, so first topic that I want to delve into is how to declare and define variables. And if you've had any CS background knowledge before, you've probably heard of variables. And if you haven't, don't worry, I'm going to go over a Cliff Note version of what variables are. So variables are basically little pockets of memory that are used to store data. And this is very helpful for any code that you do. And also they could be of any type, so that could be an int, double, char, string, and there's plenty more, but these are the most common ones that we use when coding. So an int is basically any whole number, and so that could be any negative number, so let's say -3, or it could be 0, or it could be any positive number, so let's say 10. Alright, moving on to double. So this is basically any decimal number. And so that could be any negative decimal number. So that could be, let's say, -5.4, or it could be 0.0, or it could be any positive decimal number. So let's say 5.3. All right, moving on to char. So char is basically representative of characters, and characters could be any symbol that could be found on your keyboard. So let's say an exclamation point, or it could be a space, or it could be any number. So let's say the number 0, or it could be any letter. So let's say the letter Y. All right, so as you can see, there's also 0 here and 0 here. So what are the differences? Well, for every char that you see, you may notice these single quotes that are surrounding it. And that's a distinguishing characteristic that chars have. They always have this one quote that goes before and after the character that you're defining. All right, so there's also strings, and strings are a combination of characters. So let's say the word hello, for example. Each letter is representative of a character, and they're basically combined together to form this word, or a string. And so the distinguishing characteristic for strings are these double quotes that you see surrounding the word or string. And so how do you actually declare and define it in your code? Well, you utilize this equal sign operator. And in this next slide, you will see that the variables a and b are being declared here, and what they're being defined by 3 and a. So whatever being stored is on the right side, and whatever storing them, so the variables are always on the left-hand side of the operator. So let's say 3 is being stored into a. So what type would a be? And since 3 is not a decimal number, nor does it have any of the single or double quotation marks surrounding them, this would be of type int. All right, and in this case, and many other cases, you can define a variable by another variable. And so we're storing the variable a into the variable b. And since we know that 3 is already in a, we can see that 3 is also being stored into b. So that would be the answer for that question. Moving to the next one, there's the variable c. And what's being stored in them are a combination of characters. And how do I know that? It is these double quotes here, which means that it is of type string. And what will be stored in C? Well, it's the string hello world, since this is on the right hand side and the variable doing the storing is always on the left. So arithmetic operations. So we have addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. You should be pretty comfortable with these, but how to use them in code is the real question. So when using variables, you could do a equals a plus any number that you desire. In this case, it would be 3, and so on for subtraction, multiplication, and division. Also, there are these shorthands that you could use that mean the same thing. So you could either use a plus equals 3, or any of the number that you want to use, or you could write it out in the long way. So this is basically any like a small shortcut you could use when you're utilizing variables for addition or subtraction or multiplication or division. Otherwise, if that kind of confuses you, there's no problem with writing it the long way. So like this. Also, if you don't want to do the calculations yourself and want the computer to do it, so in case you're working with really large numbers, you could just do numbers only instead of just having a variable in there. So in this case, we could do 2 plus 3, which is 5, and that will get stored into A. So 3 minus 2 is 1. That gets stored into A. There's 2 times 3, 6. That gets stored into A. And there's 6 divided by 2, which is 3, and then keep in note of this little side thing here that says that any int will be converted to a double when using division. So you will always be resulted with a double. So you got to convert that 3 into a 3.0 because division will always result in a double no matter what. With addition, subtraction, multiplication, it really depends on what the numbers you're starting off with are. So if both of them are ints, as you can see for these examples, you will always get an int. So an int plus or minus or multiplication by another int will always result in another int. But if there's a case where you have at least one double within the parameters of what you're defining, so let's say a double plus a double, that will result in a double. If you have a double plus an int, you would also get a double. And this goes for subtraction and multiplication as well, along with this case. So if you have at least one double in here, then that will result in a double. Otherwise, it will just remain as an int. All right, so let's look at this example. So 3 is being stored into A, and we said that this is a shorthand for A equals A plus 6. And since 3 is currently in A, you would do 3 plus 6, which is 9, and 9 gets stored into A and updates A. So if you look at the next line where A is equal to A minus 3, this would now be 9 instead of 3. So you do 9 minus 3, which is equal to 6, and that gets updated into A. All right, so A equals A times 2. So this would now be 6 times 2, and that is equal to 12. So 12 gets stored into A. And this is also shorthand for A equals A divided by 2. And so 12 gets stored into A, right? And 12 divided by 2, that's 6. And since we are dividing, we need to convert that to a double. So it's 6.0, and that will get stored into A. So the answer will be 6.0. Let's talk about modulus now. Modulus is when you calculate the remainder when you're dividing two numbers. And so when you do A equals 8 mod 3, you got to think of how many times does 3 fit into 8 without overflowing it or creating a bigger number than 8. So the answer would be 2, right? Because 3 times 2 is 6, and if you do 3 times 3, the number would be too big because it would be 9, and 9 is bigger than 8. So you have 6 right now, and so what you do is 8 minus 6, and that results in 2, and 2 is the number that gets stored into A. So it will result in 2. All right, now talking about exponents. So to represent an exponent in Python, all you have to do is A equals A, which the base would always go before the star star, and then the power would be the number that goes after the star star. So in this case, it would be A to the third, and that will get stored into A. So let's go through an example now. So 2 to the third, right? Because the base and the power. So 2 to the third, that equals 8. So 8 is what gets stored into A. 9 mod 4. So how many times does 4 go into 9 without overflowing? Twice. And so that equals 8 because 4 times 2 is 8. 9 minus 8, that is 1. So 1 gets stored into B. All right, let's do A mod B now. So since we know that A is currently 8 and B is currently 1, it would be 8 mod 1. 1 goes into 8 8 times, and so 1 times 8 is 8. 8 minus 8 is 0. So you have no remainders for this. So 0 is stored into C. Let's do a to the C power, which is equal to 8 to the 0, and that equals to 1. And so 1 will get stored into A. All right, let's talk about the print function. And the print function is a function in Python that allows you to print numbers, letters, and strings, basically anything into your terminal. So let's go through these examples. So if you print out the string hello, you get the word hello. If you print out the int 789, you get 789 printed out. If you do a list of strings, so John, Paul, Ringo, George, and you print out that list, you get John, Paul, Ringo, George. And for this case, if you have a separator or sep and you explicitly define what it is, then instead of getting a space like you do, if you were to ignore this, you would get hello space, how do you do? Because if you do not explicitly define what the sep is, it will automatically be defaulted to a space that goes in between these two strings. Otherwise, since we are actually defining what the sep would be, in this case a tilde, instead of that space, you would get a tilde there. So it would be hello, exclamation point, tilde, how do you do? All right, so let's talk about single quotes. So when you do a single quote, you could use these interchangeably with a print function. So this would also be an hello. For end is usually defaulted to a new line. And what that means is if you don't explicitly define what end is, and you just have these two print statements, let's say, it would be hello, and then you would start a new line, so it would go down below, and then 789 would be printed right under hello. So this is what will get printed. But since we're actually defining what the end is, for this case, it would be hey, hi, and then there would be a space here. And then if you do another print statement here, it would get printed all on the same line. So it would go right after here. And it will be printed all in one line. All right, moving on to It's a Wonderful Day. So when you're using single quotes to print, you want to be careful if you have an apostrophe somewhere in the string. Because if you're doing open, close, it just has it, and then you don't know what's going to go on with as a wonderful day, right? Because you have this to here. And so you would have an extra close single quote, and that would cause an error. So in order to fix this, what you'd want to do is you want to make it a double quote. So this would all become a string, and then you could print that string out. And so that would print out It's a Wonderful Day. All right, so let's talk about true and false. So true and false is very important for when it comes to condition statements. And as we talked before, there are different types of variables, right? And this includes bool. And bool can either be true or false, nothing else. And this is important for conditional statements, which is a topic we'll delve more into tomorrow. But like the main idea is if some statement is true, then the following code that is right under that statement and is indented will run. If it's not, or if it's false, if the statement is false, then it will skip over those lines of code and go on. All right, so how do we actually compare and have these statements? So the answer is you can use comparison operators. So for example, you could do if A is equal to B, return true, otherwise false is returned. You could do if A is not equal to B, return true, otherwise false is returned. Do A is less than B, return true, otherwise false is returned. You could do A is greater than B, return true, otherwise false is returned. Or you could do A is less than or equal to B, which returns true, otherwise false is returned. Or you could do A is greater than or equal to B, which returns true, otherwise false is returned. All right, so let's go through this example now. So 7 is being stored into A, 3 is being stored into B. So this is saying if A is not equal to B, then print A. So A is currently 7, B is currently 3, and 7 is not equal to 3, so this is a true statement. And so since this is true, then it will go to this print statement and actually run it. So will A be printed? Yes. The next topic I want to delve into is white space and indentation. So there's this thing called the offside rule, which makes sure that your code is always lined up. So let's say if you had A equals 3 and B equals 2, and then an if statement here, so if A is greater than 2, then you indent and make sure whatever code that you want to run in that case is right under the condition statement and indented as it should be. This is very important because unlike other languages, Python does not utilize this semicolon. So every time you do one step, you want to start in a new line, make sure these are all lined up, and then these indentations are also important because for other languages like C++ and Java, you will have to use these brackets usually just to keep things neat. But in Python you don't have to, so there's also that. And it's also good practice because it'll make your code look more neat and easier to read. So there's two examples here. There's the good example and the bad example, where you can see the good one has these nicely lined up and the bad one does not because it's very scrambled and all over the place. And so since these are the same pieces of code but with different indentation, let's see what exactly happens when you actually run both of them. So in the good example, you could see everything's lined up as it should be. We run it and it prints out what should be expected. A and B are not equal. Let's go to the next one, which is the bad example. All right, so let's see. This will cause an indentation error, and so that would not even run. So it's always a good idea to avoid this example as much as possible and always strive for this. Another important thing is commenting, and commenting is basically little sentences that you could write in your code that could serve as a reminder. So there may be cases where you may have to step away from your code and take a little break, and when you come back you might run into the problem that you're like, oh my gosh, I forgot what I was coding exactly, and you run your train and you don't have your train of thought going. And so these comments will serve as a reminder and basically remind you on what you're doing. Also, comments are also helpful for when you're working with other people because they'll explain what's going on in your code. So it'll serve as a mini explanation on what's going on and what's happening. And overall, it will make your code look more organized and professional because I know UIC courses will always expect you to have commented code. And they're usually easy points to get for projects, so there's no reason not to do them. So for Python, what you want to do is you want to use the pound or hashtag sign to actually use comments in your code. So every time there's a pound sign, the computer will see it and then it'll be like, okay, this is a comment. I'm going to ignore whatever is following in that line and I'm just going to go to the next one and see if it does not have a pound sign. If it doesn't, I'm just going to go read it. So the computer doesn't actually read what's going on here. It just basically ignores it because it knows it's a comment. So in that case, you could basically write whatever you want in this line. So a good rule of thumb that I like to do is before I start coding, I actually just write a small summary about what this code is about. So for this case, I do a code that will check if A is less than B. And that's very important because there may be some people who are skimming through your code and that just serves as a little, basically a summary or explanation about what your code is going to do. Another good thing that I like to do is for every section, so let's say if you're doing a conditional statement or maybe a loop, which is a topic that we'll go through later, I always like to write an extra comment explaining what this conditional statement or this loop is going to be used for. So in this case, it's use a conditional statement to check if this is true. So for each individual case, I also like to write a little comment saying what the case is and what will happen if this case does happen. So for this one, I did case where A is less than B, print out results. Case where A is not less than B, print out result. So these are basically what you should do when commenting, or if you're a little lost about what to comment, these are some good guidelines to help you when you're coding your own code. What I would also advise you not to do is comment out every single line of code that you have, because it will get a bit tedious and it'll make your code look even messy than it was meant to be. And so if I would avoid doing like 3 is stored in A, or like 4 is stored in B. Like that will just get a bit tedious because you're basically commenting every single line and it'll just look very messy. So I'd advise you to stay away from that and just try to comment out the most important parts of your code that you want to share. And so that is all the topics that I want to delve into today. Thank you so much for listening. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment or any questions below. And thank you so much.